So you will have to excuse my rather hoarse voice today. We've had people around. I'll get straight to the point. Today I'm going to be talking about the Brimstone Missile. An interesting phrase when dealing with this missile. When I first was actually discussing it with someone, it was someone in the defence industry. And the phrase they used, I believe, was, "Anything you can do, I can do British." Which, whether you agree with the sentiment or not, it is incredibly difficult to deny in regard to Brimstone. So, as stated, Brimstone is a missile, meaning it uses or double propulsion system in order to launch and then maneuver in order to find its way to a target. And Brimstone is most comparable to the Hellfire missile. Hellfire is the sort of American counterpart, and Hellfire is a legendary missile. Before I even looked into any sort of military content, I knew about Hellfire. So Hellfire is an air-to-ground missile, notably and famously, and you'll have to excuse me sort of clearing my throat throughout, notably and famously used on the Apache to deliver precision effects. There are some fairly, well, I'm not going to say my opinion on them, but there are videos about them being used, or direct footage of them being used in the War on Terror to strike specific targets with incredibly precise effects. Hellfire is somewhat old, with its latest iteration, well, I believe its latest iteration was Hellfire 2 in 2012, which is, I believe, the same year Brimstone 2 was actually deployed. But in any case, the technology utilised is probably a little bit older because Hellfire program, as a program, was started a little earlier. Brimstone, in comparison, is an improvement. It is a monumental improvement. So it's designed for fire and forget procedure, specifically against mass formations of enemy armour. So it's not more like Hellfire, designed to strike specific targets. It's designed for mass formations of enemy armour, perhaps not to be used against just men running around in jeeps or whatever. But it's proven perfectly effective in that environment, as I will talk about later. And it's also proven incredibly effective in Ukraine recently. So, Hellfire, its comparable counterpart, can be fired from a rotary wing aircraft. Brimstone can be launched from a rotary wing aircraft as well as a fixed wing aircraft, travelling at speed, as well as potentially ships and naval surfaces, as well as ground launchers, or this unmanned ground vehicle named Themis, which I want to associate with Estonia, but I'm not quite sure why. And apparently will be UAS capable, so unmanned aerial systems capable, like Reaper or Tyrannus or Concept 1, soon enough. So in regard to firing platforms, it has an impressive range of choice, meaning it's far more utilisable for pretty much anything you could possibly want. In regard to the Brimstone program, as mentioned, like Hellfire, there have been iterations of Brimstone, series of munitions, as there often are. But Brimstone has had 3 iterations, whereas Hellfire, I believe, has only had 2. But realistically, Brimstone has had 2 comparable iterations, with Brimstone 3 being Spear 3, which is incredibly different and has incomparable range. So I'm going to be doing a specific video on that in a little while. Anyway, we've had these 3 iterations of Brimstone, so the specs for this video I'm going to be giving on the latest operational variant, which is Brimstone 2. And so if we're to talk about Brimstone in itself now, it was originally designed and sort of pioneered by GEC Marconi, back when it got acquired by GEC Marconi, that is, but it's now integrated into BAE Systems, and the munition is now manufactured by MDBA UK, in Henlo. So Brimstone costs, and apologies, I've noticed I'm doing that a lot. I'll try to stop that. Brimstone costs £105,000 per unit, which is, rather ironically, considering its, in my opinion, superior capability, to Hellfire, which is cheaper than its less effective counterpart, which costs £126,000, roughly. And I've just done it again. It has a length of 1.8 meters, a diameter of 0.18 meters, so it is still, a reasonably small diameter munition. In regard to range, it can travel 60 plus kilometers from a fixed wing platform and 40 plus kilometers from a rotary wing platform. And again, we will have to sort of see what the other variants or the other launch platforms yield, but that's the information we have for the moment. This new range, the 60 plus kilometers from fixed wing and 40 plus kilometers from rotary wing, is a massive improvement from Brimstone 1, which could only traverse 20 plus kilometers from fixed wing and 12 kilometers from rotary wing. But this in itself is a pretty huge improvement from Hellfire, which could only go from about 7 to 11 kilometers. And sort of just a note on that, a large reason why Brimstone is so innovative is because it's an innovation in the ethos of dealing with any attack helicopters. So prior to Brimstone, prior to utilization of ranges over 12 kilometers, the entire idea was that one would effectively use the pop-up and strike method. One maybe comes up once in order to acquire targeting data, then redescends into cover, then emerges from cover again in order to fire upon the target, and then once the munition is fired, it then redescends into cover. So this is a fairly substantial new capability for attack helicopters, and actually the utilization that doesn't require this pop-up strike sort of mannerism. It means that attack helicopters can utilize air-to-ground missiles from a longer range, from a safer distance. So, in regard to the Brimstone program itself, Brimstone as a program has the name Spear. Spear standing for Specific Precision Effects at Range. Its second variant certainly achieves this with its 60 plus kilometers from fixed wing and 40 plus kilometers from a rotary wing platform. Its third variant, as I'm not going to bring up in this video so much, Spear 3, will again have its own video because, the increase in range is just huge. I'm going to talk about the warhead for a moment. So the warhead weighs 14 pounds. Only 14 pounds, which is 6 pounds lighter than Hellfire 2, which is impressive. So what it uses is a heat tandem warhead. It's a shaped warhead utilizing a crush or impact fuse, or a command fuse, I believe. And so just for those who don't quite understand what a heat warhead is, or a heat tandem shaped warhead, heat stands for high explosive anti-tank, so it's specifically designed for anti-tank roles. And tandem effectively means one has two parts to the warhead. So there's a smaller initial inertial charge, which weighs only 0.22 pounds, which is pretty incredible on its own, which is designed to initiate reactive armor, and then the second warhead can just come in and penetrate and use that explosive power from within in order to immobilize or destroy tank units. In regard to reactive armor, just to quickly explain what that is, for those who aren't sure what it is, if you've ever seen a tank, you probably see these rectangular prisms, these small box-looking things on the sides or all over the tanks in some cases. That's reactive armor. The idea is when something hits them, particularly hardened kinetic munitions or something along those lines, or shaped charges, which, granted, Brimstone does have, but it uses the initial charge in order to render these nullified. The idea is, upon impact or upon proximity, this reactive armor, rather than just allowing the munition to actually hit, explodes itself, not only slowing down the munition drastically, but ideally pushing it away. In any case, attempting to make the munition, generally high kinetic energy munitions, fairly useless, because it slows them down to the point that they have no penetrative power. So it nullifies the effects of these sorts of warheads and shaped charges. But in this case, the initial inertial charge of 0.22 pounds is designed to split off and, via an explosion, activate this reactive armor so that the actual penetrator can get through and destroy the tank from within. As I said, the rest of the charge is designed to actually penetrate and defeat the base armor and explode. So, Brimstone's warhead has had some development. It has been upgraded. The most notable upgrade, I'd say, is the upgrade for insensitive munitions. So what this means is that if it gets shot down, or an accident happens, or sort of during mid-flight it hits a pigeon has a really bad day, the warhead isn't actually active until it comes into contact or proximity to the target, meaning if it's hit or an accident happens, the warhead doesn't explode, which is probably a positive thing. It makes it safer, and it also means that there's no explosion where there shouldn't be an explosion. Another upgrade on the Brimstone variant allows multiple fuse settings. So, as I said earlier, its primary fuse setting is impact or crush. So, once it actually penetrates, once it hits the tank, it begins the explosion. And that has a pretty good effect. But in order to utilize the munition in a more versatile way, in order to increase its range of capability, they have also added the fuse settings of proximity, which is if it gets close, it explodes, impact or crush, and airburst, which is pretty useful for unarmored convoys, as I believe some Brimstone variants are getting their own sort of specialized role as designed to destroy unarmored convoys and unarmored moving targets. So that's fairly useful. In any case, Brimstone is incredibly potent, even when it comes to its warhead, which is reasonably standard, giving it 3 times more, I believe it's 3 times, more effective sort of against tank modern units than the AGM-65 Maverick munition, and an incredibly impressive, proven 98.7%, I don't want to say accuracy, but success rate. So it's able to destroy the target 98.7% of the time, accounting for errors in penetration and accounting for errors in targeting, which eventually will happen, but it's a very low margin of error. For its engine, it uses solid rocket fuel, and the idea of the entire munition itself, as I've sort of said, is this pinpoint accuracy. And this pinpoint accuracy is another reason why Brimstone is so effective. And like any missile, its accuracy comes from its targeting and sensor system. So, as I stated at the beginning, Brimstone is fire and forget, meaning once you've fired it, the operator's done their job. It flies off, it destroys the target, and you can sit back, albeit rather stressed, rather tensely, and have a nice cup of tea. In order to achieve this fire and forget status, and in order to track its target so precisely, because it is a precise munition, it uses millimeter wave seeker. So I'm just going to talk about this for a bit because I think it's important, And what we're seeing is for these small diameter munitions, which are going to probably be employed more as swarm technology becomes more effective. What we're seeing is more use of millimeter wave seekers, which it sort of uses radar cross scatterings in order to track them and create an actual computer detailed path. So that means that this sort of munition is incredibly effective against moving targets, and it's minimally affected by bad weather, as some laser systems may be. And I think, just a bit of a note. I'm going to leave in the description the video from BAE Systems of this thing flying and, hitting dead on a pickup, traveling at 70 plus miles an hour with just this pinpoint accuracy. It's incredible. I recommend you watch it. So look in the description for that. There is also a possible dual mode seeker, which was sort of implemented during the, I believe, Afghanistan conflict, because they needed, I think it was man-in-the-loop capability in order to fulfill treaty responsibilities in order to have men engaging. So this upgrade is optional for Brimstone because it was employed for specifically Afghanistan, but I think it can be added to the unit, or the unit can be augmented for about £30,000 to £40,000 plus VAT. And the development cost of this program, in order to augment the head, or in order to give it dual mode seekers in which it can employ sort of classical laser guidance, cost about 10 million, in addition to the 370 million it took to develop Brimstone. So a minimal amount for something that's really quite useful for actually fulfilling treaty promises. So I'll leave you to sort of draw your own conclusions from that. Another capability is Brimstone's tracking systems and sort of in-flight flight path options. So if one looks at the classic AGM-65 Maverick and you look at the Warthog, the Thunderbolt 2, shoot it, it takes the most direct sort of line of fire, which for all people say that looks simplistic and they like to see a missile maneuver around. That's generally what you see for anti-air missiles. If you're hitting something that is moving fairly slowly in comparison to the aeroplane, in comparison to the munition, and all you need to do is effectively predict where it's going to go, considering the high speed of the munition, then the fastest possible time in order to hit the target is the most straight line. And that's fairly important, actually, because that minimizes the time they're going to be able to shoot back at you. So while people may sort of say this is simplistic and it doesn't look as visually cinematic, I guess, as something spinning around before finally slamming into its target, it is fairly important. Brimstone can, of course, do this. It can take the most direct route. But unlike Maverick, it can take augmented routes. It has differential trajectories. So you can sort of program multiple missile flight paths. So if you're dealing with armor like Javelin, like the Javelin missile, you probably want sort of a top attack approach in which you can take a higher trajectory and then a more direct penetrative route down onto the armored target. Or if you're employing airburst, you want to have probably more like that, so you have an array spreading out. Whereas if you want to avoid obstacles, if you want to avoid anti-air fire, there is the option to take a lower trajectory, but the entire point is that it's adaptive, and one can use the actual situation in order to determine tactical choice for the flight path. So I think that's fairly important. So you can either have a decreased profile or increased penetration, multiple flight paths, which is rather important. And I've probably gone on for a bit too long now. I've rambled a little bit. I'm looking at the timer and it's about to hit 20 minutes. So I'll have to finish this up fairly quickly. All in all, Brimstone is a pretty effective weapon. It's got advanced capability, which makes it, in my eyes, pretty special, I think, particularly because it is an original British munition. while Brimstone has an excellent range, considering its sort of rotary launch advancement, which is something, we haven't thought we needed, multiple platform launches, sensors, just incredible capability in comparison to what came before, and in comparison to Hellfire. I think it's pretty incredible. The only thing that might be better is if it managed to deliver this sort of precision at long range, perhaps even standoff range. Well, they are doing precisely that, so I will have a look at Spear 3 in the next one.